Chris, the host of I Do Part 2, where we talk about creating deeper connections in our marriage, especially if you've been married a few years. And I share marriage stories from lots of different perspectives on my blog at idopart2.com. So I hope you'll join me there. But today we're talking with an emotional intelligence expert. Do you have an emotionally intelligent marriage? Well, if you're not so sure, join me because I'm not so sure too. But we will be talking with Christopher Connors. So stay tuned. It is such an honor to introduce Christopher Connors, who is an expert in emotional intelligence. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with what's most important to Chris, his faith and his family. Chris has a beautiful wife and three amazing baseball-loving boys, one of which was just born a few months ago. How's everybody doing?
We're functioning on little sleep these days, as I'm sure you can appreciate.
Yes.
And yeah, just doing really well. I mean, it's amazing in the rhythm of life when things do get busy that sometimes you maybe miss the small details, but I feel like there's a part of each day that I really do realize how lucky we are, even though things are very busy and hectic right now. It's a very special time in life.
Yes, it's so hard to be in the moment when the kids are toddlers and you're running and you're working and you're going in 100 million different directions. But you do look back and wish that at least I do, I look back and wish that I'd been in the moment a little more. So it's great that you recognize that already. Well, let me go on to introduce Chris a little bit more because he is a best-selling author of 2 books, which I'll post in the notes, and a motivational speaker and an executive coach who really tries to empower his leaders to build thriving cultures and winning teams. So it's pretty exciting to have him on board here today. And what does this have to do with I Do Part 2? Well, some of you might already be familiar with emotional intelligence, but not everyone is. And so, Chris, I would love it if you would elaborate a little bit on emotional intelligence and leadership and in the workplace, but then roll that into our topic today. What does an emotional intelligent marriage look like?
Absolutely, yeah. So give you that kind of textbook definition. So for the what and the why, so what emotional intelligence really is, it's the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our emotions. And it's the ability to recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. And that's kind of that classical definition that best explains what EQ, or EI, some people would say, really is. As I talked about in the book, I think another easy way to understand emotional intelligence, I see it through 5 pillars: empathy, self-awareness, self-regulation or self-management, motivation, and then social skill. So a lot of the work that I'm doing these days is helping to equip leaders either in a coaching capacity or in terms of some of the speeches that I give and talking about things like how we communicate, how we identify opportunities, how we build relationships both professionally and personally, which, as we know, in the last 8 months have been so critical. Much of this has been done virtually. And then also talking about decision making. And so I think that when we look at all of the different parts of EQ, how we're recognizing and understanding and managing our own emotions, but then how from a leadership standpoint, we're trying to influence the emotions of other people in a positive way and tying that into business outcomes and goals and results and things like that. That's a lot of where my specialty is, but I love, at first, I'm a human. I'm someone who loves personal development. I deeply cherish, as we talked about a little in the beginning, the relationship I have with my wife and with my children, right. With my birth family, friends. And so I have seen so much of, my inspiration for talking about emotional intelligence from a business standpoint has really come from my personal life of recognizing and understanding and managing my own emotions and learning more about myself over time.
Awesome. One of the things about all of that, when you're reading through the book and conversations we've had is self-awareness. That's huge, because if you don't even recognize that you're doing something, and you talk a lot about, accepting your spouse, and that all has to do with, the values we're grounded in, which I think is so important. But let's talk a little bit more about self-awareness, because that's an important attribute, just a skill to develop, to really realize.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, it's a variety of things. I talk about, especially on a personal development level, for us as individuals, I talk about having a game plan for living. And I talk about some of the things that you just referenced: passion, values, understanding our purpose, mission, and goals. And so for me, purpose is a lot of what a lot of people are probably familiar with as far as what Simon Sinek talks about in terms of having a why. I think as it pertains to when we're talking about marriage, when we're talking about children and families, so much of it for me is who's your who are the people that you're really caring for, working for, building that relationship with. But being able to define success, to have goals in life. And I think that, for me, even when we're so often focused on professional success, that there's having personal goals, and there's pushing yourself
Right.
in what I would talk about in the four dimensions of wellness, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And as we go back to talking about some of that family and personal, I think having the self-awareness to understand yourself first and be the best that you can for yourself first, so that you can be the best that you can. So, going back to that definition of emotional intelligence in terms of having self-awareness to then positively influence someone, it's being mindful of who they are, of different things that are going to make them happy, fulfilled, how you can do nice things for somebody else. And in the case of marriage, it's always being very conscious and outward seeking, not just looking inward, but being outward seeking, and having that ability to recognize how you can help somebody else.
Yeah, awesome. Well, along those lines, you talk a lot about empathy, and I think, you have to have self-awareness to have empathy. And I grew up in a very loving family, but it was a pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of family. And so we didn't really talk about our emotions. And so when my husband and I really started kind of running into some challenges in our marriage when the kids were all toddlers, because it's a really tough time, one of the things that came out in marriage counseling was that I really didn't, he wasn't great at it, but I was horrible at really putting myself in his shoes. And I had a hard time explaining it, to the point that the counselor had to come over next to me and respond appropriately. I mean, that's where we were at. And so talk more about empathy in marriage, because I think in a broader scheme in our whole, our culture right now, I don't want to get into politics, but it's a skill that if you don't have it, you need it. And we all need to work on, empathy for others, because whether it's our spouse, our children, or the broader culture, we may not always agree, but we need to see things through someone else's eyes. So I'd love you to elaborate on empathy.
Yeah, no, you did a beautiful job of describing it. I think for me, empathy does begin with, really very simply putting yourself in someone else's shoes and seeing things from their unique point of view. I would say with empathy, I always go back to a quote that I love. And this people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So
Right.
think about that, right? We there's so many times that we're turning to our partner and we're wanting to communicate the things that are on our mind in a day. But maybe sometimes we're talking over that person. Maybe we're not reading their body language the right way, or maybe we're just too caught up in our own thing and we're not investing in, I care about you. I want to hear what you have to say. And so the other thing that I would say, Lisa, is that, for me, another very simple thing when it comes to empathy, and it's so important in a marriage. And as I've learned, we just want somebody to listen.
And not fix.
100%. And I don't think I've never seen anybody put this better. There's a popular video would encourage your audience to watch that Dr. Brene Brown has out there about empathy. And I learned so much from that several years ago when I watched it, that exactly what you just said. Sometimes we just want somebody there to listen. We don't want somebody to problem solve, to basically be a consultant for us. We just want somebody to be able to be there to listen and say, I got this, I got you, and I'm here for you. And how powerful that is, isn't it?
Right. No, it really is. Because early on in our marriage, my husband was the fixer and I was the avoider. And, fortunately, overall we got along really well and our values were in line. But that became an issue. That was really irritating for me when I just wanted to come home and say something that happened at work, and I didn't need it to be completely and solved. And I think that's an issue for a lot of people. So realizing that, and that brings me to, how has, you and your wife met in college. How have you used emotional intelligence over time to improve your relationship?
Yeah, well, I go back, for me, because and I think so much of the way we see emotional intelligence is self-awareness and empathy, adaptability. So I feel like you're asking me an adaptability question too, of how have we kind of adapted to our marriage. And what I would say is, and maybe she'd say differently, but, I think it's learning to listen more. And that's the empathy part of it to me is really, my wife's very successful. She's the CEO of a nonprofit here and has been very successful as a businesswoman. I feel like a much tougher job is actually being the mom of three children. And so I actually, as much as I admire her business career, admire what she's done personally for our family. But, it's being there to listen to her after a challenging day. It's being there to maybe, again, not solution, not problem solve, just kind of get her thoughts on how, she feels about different things. And so I think what I would say to you, and I wish I could change the person who I was maybe earlier on, was that, I was that person that more extroverted, likely to over communicate, whereas she was, potentially a little bit more reserved. And so I think the other side of just adapting and better understanding who she is as a person is, recognizing that we are two different people. And I'd say that one of the biggest secrets to our success as two people who, very much love each other and have had a really great marriage is that we have really embraced the differences. We've really embraced the fact that we are different and that we have certain opposites that actually blend quite well with one another. And I find that, both in terms of just our relationship with one another, but also in terms of how we parent. Because the great thing is that we have, you talked in the beginning about values. We really do have a lot of the same values, I think, as the foundation. Mm-hmm. And I would say, I from my experiences, I look back, I think if we did not have that foundation of values, it would be that much more difficult. And I think
absolutely.
Both consciously and subconsciously, absolutely. I think we saw in one another when we first met, that we had that part of it, and there were right. just those other things to kind of negotiate, right?
Yes, exactly. I think we were similar in that, our similar values were what attracted us. But at the time I was in my 20s, we met in college. I wasn't really thinking of the term values. I mean, it kind of naturally happened. And thank goodness, because when you hit tough times, if you two aren't on the same page in your values and, integrity and honesty and, the motivation to keep going, it can be, very difficult. And so Chris, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is I was very interested in your book, The Value of You. And you mentioned 4 love languages that C.S. Lewis wrote about. And I honestly am not familiar with that. I'm more familiar with the 5 love languages that Gary Chapman put out years ago, which is just continued on. And I would highly recommend to anyone. It's just kind of a basic foundational, book. So tell us a little bit more about C.S. Lewis's love languages.
This book, The Four Loves, was, like I mentioned, it was a compilation of radio talks that he had given. And I would say, it really had a profound influence on the way that I saw, love on the whole and in terms of relationships. And so he refers to them in the book by the Greek words, which I'm not going to dare try here. I'll try to give more of the English explanation of it. But, he talked about it in terms of having a love of God, which is something that is a big part of my life, but also, just kind of that romantic love and then that friendship and affection, for example. Right. And so, I think as we think about it in the context of marriage, I for so many people, you want to have, the friendship and the affection, right? Of course, there's the romantic side of it that makes us, husband and wife. But I think, I always go back to the affection. I think for me, that's the one that I have the most intellectual curiosity about. It's the little inside jokes. It's the little things that you and your husband are the only 2 people on planet Earth that would, you guys are the only ones that would understand, right? It's the little conversations you have. And knowing, for example, where something would be in the house that not another person in the world would know.
Right.
It's all of those little things, so to speak, that to me comprise affection. And so, just for anyone listening in your audience here, I mean, I think we're so easy to think of the friendship and romantic sexual side of things, obviously, but it's for me, it comes back to that affection. It's those little things, it's those idiosyncrasies that we know about one another. It's the little things that make us laugh. And I think deep down, I'm someone that's, as my mom would say, a bit of a kidder, a bit of a jokester. And so I like to be able to have fun and keep things loose that way. And I would really say that, and I know other people would as well, but I would say that that is something that when I really think about it, being able to have that sense of humor and share jokes with one another has been just immensely important in terms of the friendship, the affection that we have.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. We didn't really touch on humor, but that's often some people's number one thing is maybe not number one, but it's pretty high up there, is being able to make each other laugh and enjoy each other's company and just, enjoy being together. And for many of my viewers, you're a little ways off from this, but you've seen your parents and your older siblings and what have you. And, we're all looking toward empty nesting. And so you really want to enjoy, your partner in this time. And I just think that's so important. And that's part of why, I really started I Do Part Two, because I was sitting around with some really good friends and we were all talking about our different concerns and things we were excited about doing. And I thought, I'm going to try to find those aha moments that I say, oh gosh, I wish I would have known this earlier. And, having you on is a perfect example, of that, and whetting people's appetite with emotional intelligence. And I'll link your books, below this video. And so I just can't thank you enough, Chris, for being on today. I know you could be on a lot of stages in the world. And when I look at your resume and different networks and people who've interviewed you and you've spoken to, I feel incredibly blessed to have your time and for you to share this space. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
You bet. I love what you're doing, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Perfect. Thank you. Have a great day.